So this is about a project that we call Mind to Mind. And essentially, it's a way of studying this notion of the illusion of separation. One way to get into this topic is by asking, well, what is reality? Reality is what I perceive, isn't it? Well, no. So here's one example. So this looks like three perfectly lovely ladies, but let's turn this picture upside down and something looks wrong. Well, what looks wrong is that their eyes and mouths are upside down. And so when we go back to the original picture like this, we can't see that it's upside down because our brains are so used to looking at faces that it hides that from us. So again, I'll turn it again. And there you go. So this is just one of thousands of illusions that show that our perceptions of reality are not always what it actually is. Here's another example. Choose one of these playing cards, any one, doesn't matter. Now focus on that card that you chose, and I've just taken it away. So how could I do that? Because there's lots of people on the call, and maybe you all chose different cards, but I took them away. Well, how did I do that? Well, here's the answer. So on the top is the original 6 cards, and on the bottom was the one where I supposedly took your card away. Well, they're all different than the ones on the top. So yet another illusion, that's one that's used by magicians, where if you're focusing on a card, one of the 6 on the top, you're not paying attention to the other ones, and that's why the trick works. So all of this means that subjective and objective realities aren't the same thing. And what we see is what we expect to see. And what we see is a very thin slice of reality. So then what is real reality? Well, we have a clue from physics. On the right side there is the classical world, and the left side is the quantum world. And so in the classical world, our everyday world, we have terms like locality, causality, fixed reality, and space-time. These are what a philosopher would call naive reality. It's what we think we're seeing. We go deeper into the world of quantum mechanics, we find that this notion of separation that we feel, actually there is no separation. So instead of locality, we have non-locality, and we have acausality. We have a participatory reality, and it's beyond space-time. So there are other hints about what real reality is. And so here I'm plotting the impact of an experience and the frequency of that experience. So down here, we have things that range from the mundane to the profound, and from the common to the rare. So common, mundane things, people get gut feelings about events. And then there's the feeling of being stared at, and telephone telepathy, distant knowing, distant healing, premonitions, creative insight, religious epiphanies, mystical union. So who has these things? Well, down in the bottom left, everyone reports these kinds of experiences. People who are a little bit higher up on this scale, we might call healers or intuitives, geniuses, prodigies, saints, and yogis. So we can think of this as a spectrum, the extended capacities of the mind. Well, there's something peculiar about this thing because these phenomena only seem strange for one reason. They suggest that the mind transcends time and space, everyday time and space. The other thing that's strange is up in the upper right here, these are very rare. There aren't very many geniuses and saints out there. It's beyond the reach of science, but it's well accepted that such people exist. Whereas down here, where lots and lots of people report these experiences, they're very common, they're easy to study, but they're considered highly controversial. So now we must leave our senses. Now, we're actually leaving the ordinary senses. So the kinds of experiences then that we can study and do study at IONS can be cast into these terms. There's terms like telepathy and psychokinesis and clairvoyance and precognition. All of these are commonly reported. These are the kinds of things that we can study in the lab. So today we're only going to look at telepathy. So in the most popular conscious form of telepathy experiment that has been done for the last 50 years or so, it's called the Goneld method, and it's a German word that means whole field. And so you have a person put into this Ganzfeld state, we'll call them the receiver. And so you have a red light shine on them. Then you take a ping pong ball cut in half and you put one half over each eye. So all they can see with their eyes open is pink. And then you put headphones on them that are playing white noise. So they can't see anything, they can't hear anything, but they're not sleeping either. They're still awake. And now you have a person playing the role of a sender, a telepathic sender, who looks at a randomly selected target and is going to try to inject the perception of that target into the thoughts of the other person. So rather than sending something, what appears to be happening more in these experiments is the correlation. That is, what is arising in the sender's mind seems to arise in the receiver's mind. And that is better than a transmission model because we don't see signals here, we see correlations. So in another experiment, the sender might see an elephant, and the receiver in the Ganzfeld state is asked to speak aloud anything that comes to mind. And so maybe they say something about an animal, maybe it's something about its gray. So then we take the person out of the Ganzfeld state. There were 4 images, one of which was sent by the sender, and we play back anything that the receiver said so they can be reminded of their impressions. So you can see at a glance here that the chance of the receiver being correct is 1 in 4. So here we have Gail, who's our guest today, being set up for the Ganzfeld experiment. And these are the ping pong balls over her eyes. And so this is where the experiment was done. Gail is inside our 2,000-pound electromagnetically shielded chamber, which we had when we had the Earthrise campus in Northern California. And these are the 4 targets that were randomly selected, one of which was going to be sent by another person elsewhere in the building. And so this is what Gail said. Something has a rough texture, tall, looking up high, like in an art gallery or in a museum, a Yosemite kind of image of a tall rock, monolithic, images of Mount Rushmore, and half dome, like a big stone. And since Gail is on the call today, you can ask her later what it actually felt like from the inside to get those impressions, because she had no idea what the image was that was being sent. But if you're now the judge in this experiment and you know that one of those 4 pictures was the actual target, which one would you select? Well, it turns out that this was the target. This is what was being sent, which matches the best among all of the other 4 pictures. And in fact, that's the one that Gail selected. So now Skeptic Dog says, yeah, but are these telepathy experiments independently repeatable, which is what's necessary in science to gain confidence that it's a real thing. So when you look at the experimental investigations of telepathy using this kind of method, and precursor methods too, from about the 1920s until today, lots of places. These happen to be ones at universities, but also they've been done at private institutes around the world. If you look at the 122 experiments that have been published in 20 different labs, there's 4,674 sessions like the one that I demonstrated from what Gail did. So there's over 4,000 sessions like that. And when you look at each of the 122 experiments and you look at the hit rate, well, the line in the middle is chance, the dashed line, but these dots are the actual hit rates and the error bars are the 1 standard error bars. So we can take the same data, since all of the experiments were based on the same idea, and just make a cumulative graph as though it's just one huge long experiment involving all 4,000 sessions. And that's what you get. This is a cumulative hit rate over 4,600 sessions. This has been reported repeatedly in the academic psychology literature and one of the main publications in psychology, starting in 1994. I think the last was in 2018. And so there's the overall result. So the overall result, as you can see, is about 31%. And the odds against chance of being there rather than chance is 300 trillion quadrillion to 1, with 10 to the minus 30th. So with odds of overall results of 300 trillion quadrillion to 1, you can say this: if telepathy doesn't exist, we would need to run this experiment 300 trillion quadrillion times to get a result as good as or better than what we've observed in these studies. And that would take longer than the lifetime of the universe to get these results by chance. So it's pretty likely that what we're seeing in these studies are not chance. It is something very close to the kinds of telepathic experiences that people report. And one thing I didn't go through here is alternative explanations. Well, they could take the case of Gail. Maybe Gail got some kind of sensory leakage about the target, even though she couldn't have because she was inside the shielded room when the experiment was taking place. Or maybe there were mistakes in recording or randomization and so on. All of these kinds of things have been suggested over the years. The one that was difficult to answer until recently was skeptical replication. Do skeptics doing the same study get the same result? Well, it turns out that they do. So here's two professors of psychology who did the same experiment, and they reported after 8 studies, we had overall statistically significant hit rate of 32%, where you'd expect 25%, which they then said is precariously close to demonstrating humans do have psychic powers. And they said that because they said in the article they didn't believe in any kind of ESP at all, including telepathy. So they were, to their credit, they reported the results that they got, but then they said, I don't know, maybe it doesn't really exist after all. And, prominent skeptics of psychic effects also now admit, based on these meta-analyses, that something interesting is going on. And so Richard Wiseman said, I think that these studies do meet the usual standards for a normal claim, but telepathy is not a normal claim. It's challenging to the scientific worldview, so he wasn't quite sure he was willing to say that telepathy exists. But something interesting is happening. That's pretty big for a skeptic to admit. Even looking at major scientific journals like Nature, considered one of the top 5 or so journals in the world, articles you find like this is all the way back in 2005, that the only reality is mind and observations. Physicists shy from the truth because the truth is so alien to everyday physics. The universe is entirely mental. And here in Scientific American from 2018, coming to grips with the implications of quantum mechanics, and you look at the article, and the main conclusion is a primary role for mind in nature. So these experiments are doing what Alice is doing here and pulling back the curtain, and we're beginning to look at the matrix, the informational nature of reality, and perhaps learning something new about it.